So a lot to tackle this week. What do you want to see happen in the House?
We do. I mean, the budget is probably first and foremost. And, as we're crafting the tax policies, what Republicans are looking for is, broad-based tax relief for the middle class, especially trying to address and offset the inflation that we're seeing in the short term. So we have some proposals that are revolving around extending the gas tax relief, cutting the sales tax, and reducing the income tax on middle and low-income families.
So can you tell us specifically about the income tax cut? I think Keith Faniff reported this would be the first time there'd be a potential state income tax cut since the mid-'90s.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're doing is essentially reducing the income tax rate from 5% to 4%. And the way Connecticut's tax system is done is it's tiered. So you're not, for people that are paying 6.99%, you're not paying that amount on the first dollar. You pay it in tiers. So this would only apply to people that their total earnings are for a family below 175 and for individuals below 75,000. Anybody above that, the money would be recaptured. So it is taken into account that the break really goes to the middle class only, and it keeps the wealthier tax rate intact. So it's more affordable for the state to be able to do, and it's really targeting those individuals that need the tax break.
How is it sustainable in the long term? I know we've got more than $3 billion in the rainy day fund. There's another $4 billion in surpluses. And then, of course, the federal money will be drying up in another year or so. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the overall cost of this structure is only about $368 million. So when we're looking at, where our revenues actually exceeded performance of over $1 billion, we think it is something that could be sustainable because if we are able to continue to see this sort of revenue increase, we could foot that bill. Most of our proposals of the $1.2 billion is one-time revenue. So we are recognizing the inflationary period. Hopefully it's temporary. So the sales tax and gas tax proposals would only go through the new year. It's what it's doing is spending the windfall money that Connecticut got in this year from the additional revenue. But we do believe, similarly, the Democrats' proposal with their child tax credit and the property tax credit, while they're laudable as well, we like the income tax reduction because it's broad-based. It applies to everybody regardless of whether they're children. So sustainability is an issue, I think, for both parties. But we think it's a modest change to the tax structure that we can do, and it saves about $700 per family.
I mentioned that $4 billion surplus. I believe Republicans have an interesting idea to help businesses with some of that payback of the unemployment trust fund. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it's sort of a quiet issue that isn't too sexy, but it certainly it dramatically impacts our economic recovery. In 2008, we saw our unemployment fund go insolvent, and when that happens, the state borrows money from the federal government and has to pay it back with interest. The interest rate is very low, but the people that have to pay it back are our businesses. So the assessments can be, quite high for a business. We argue that the pandemic really was not the fault of businesses. It's not like 2008 we saw an economic downturn. And so we should try to look to pay that debt off in order to help us recover more quickly. Just in my business, we were assessed a $3,500 unemployment fee just this year alone, as we're phasing back in the old structure of the unemployment fund. So it really does hurt our economic recovery. So we would like, I think our proposal is about $225 million to be paid into that fund so that businesses don't get assessed these special assessments, which could be upward of the thousands of dollars.
It sounds like a good idea, but I'm just wondering when we think about Connecticut's long-term obligations, we've got a big surplus. There's a $3 billion rainy day fund. But in terms of, thinking long-term and how this money should be spent, Representative Candelora.
Yeah, the long-term issue is I do think that, it's important to put something there. But we do have other long-term issues. When I was worked on the bipartisan budget, we implemented that volatility cap that created that large, $3.5 billion savings account essentially, and we're paying down about $1.5 billion in our pensions. But people would be surprised to hear that since 2017, our unfunded liabilities have gone from $75 billion to $95 billion. So the caps are great that we put in place, these fiscal reforms, but I think our next step is we have to have appropriate triggers in place that freeing up that money doesn't allow us just to spend more. And it's a balancing act, and I think it's something that we're going to need to look at long term or in the short term for long-term recovery, because we thought those caps would help improve our unfunded liabilities, and they're not. So we certainly do have our work cut out for us on that.
Earlier in the show, I talked with Christine Stewart about the push by state Republicans. You'd like to see the governor and the state push back on the federal government in terms of being limited in how much you can provide in tax cuts because of the amount of federal relief that Connecticut has received. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, what's happened here is the federal government gave us plenty of money, through the ARPA. Upward of $4 billion, and now we're seeing the infrastructure money flowing in. And they're trying to tie states' hands and saying you can't give tax relief. Now, I understand we certainly don't want to provide tax relief by using the federal money, but in Connecticut's situation where we have an extra, I think it's over $1 billion of revenue that was brought in this year just from the stock market performance and inflation, like sales tax and gas tax, numbers, that the state should be allowed to use that money to offset tax increases. So we are seeking to join the Fifth Circuit and file an amicus brief that would ask that Connecticut be allowed to get out from under this cap that the federal government has put on us. 16 states have been successful in suing, and the courts have said the feds cannot cap you. And so I'm hopeful that we'll do the same, because I think everybody wants to provide some sort of tax relief to the residents of Connecticut, and this limitation is really putting a damper on it.
I had asked your colleague, Representative Rojas, about a push to help social services that also provide much-needed services to state residents. Where do you stand on that in terms of boosting the money that these nonprofits, considering what they provide the state?
Yeah, I mean, the nonprofit industry is just critical for Connecticut's operations, especially when we're looking at the mental health issues that are creeping up, from children through adults. Those are the individuals that are supplying those services, and they do it much more efficiently and less expensive than the state. So we do need to look at providing increases for them, and I believe the appropriations of spending package has provided that. The flip side is that a lot of this money is one-time money. So how do we build it into the budget to make it more sustainable and permanent for them? It's certainly going to be a challenge, and I think we all agree it needs to happen. It's just a matter of getting the resources to get there.